the First World War claimed the lives of 10 million soldiers. Add to that another 9 million civilian casualties. At this scale, the math becomes difficult to process. The individuals vanish into a sea of statistics. Psychologists refer to this as the empathy gap, the mental barrier we encounter when trying to connect with a tragedy involving people entirely removed from our modern reality. For this specific conflict, surviving archival footage often reinforces that barrier. We see soldiers moving through stuttering, silent black and white film. Early cameras were hand-cranked, capturing fewer frames per second than modern video. When played back today, the men move with an unnatural speed, looking more like silent movie caricatures than soldiers caught in a nightmare. We can no longer ask the survivors to clarify those impressions. The last verified combat veteran of the war passed away over a decade ago. Without living memory to anchor us, the physical degradation of these archives creates a wall. It forces modern storytellers to develop radical new tactics just to help us connect with the people behind the grain. The first major shift in documentation was driven by a ticking clock in the early 1960s. Anticipating the 50th anniversary of the conflict, the BBC issued a public appeal to track down surviving veterans for a landmark documentary series called The Great War. The men who answered that call were in their 60s and 70s. They had built lives and raised families while carrying the quiet trauma of their youth into old age. Putting them on camera provided a direct line to the past. Viewers heard the raw, unfiltered memories straight from the men who had lived through them. That era successfully locked down the factual memories of the war. But as those voices inevitably grew quiet, documentarians realized they would need a new approach to reach the next generation. By the time the centennial arrived in 2014, the challenge had changed. How do you make a 100-year-old conflict feel present? A YouTube channel, also titled The Great War, attempted a radical structural experiment. They decided to broadcast the entire conflict week by week, exactly a century to the day after events originally unfolded. Viewers watched the timeline tick forward in real time. You couldn't skip ahead. You had to sit with the grinding stalemate of 1915, week after brutal week. This pacing removed the comfort of historical hindsight, replacing it with the same sense of uncertainty felt by those who didn't know if the war would ever end. By deliberately stretching the narrative across 4 actual years, the series forced its audience to live with the same exhaustive weight and uncertainty as the people on the front lines. Other filmmakers tackled the gap by focusing entirely on sensory immersion, like the French series Apocalypse and Peter Jackson's 2018 film They Shall Not Grow Old. Jackson discarded this standard documentary toolkit. He removed the maps and narrators, choosing instead to overlay the voices of 120 veterans to tell a single collective human story. To match that human audio, his team digitally stabilized the century-old footage. They inserted missing frames to slow the erratic movements down to a natural human speed. They hired forensic lip readers to decipher what the men on screen were actually saying, and then cast voice actors from those specific regions to provide the regional accents. Finally, they added color. Notice how the drab gray dissolves, revealing the specific khaki uniforms and the sharp detail of the dry stone wall. The effort to modernize the war has even spread to unexpected mediums, with the heavy metal band Sabaton releasing a fully animated movie to introduce the history to a younger demographic. These sensory resurrections remove the visual distance of the last century. When we see a soldier smile with tired, dirty realism, the historical statistics dissolve back into living, breathing young men. Historical preservation demands more than a catalog of troop movements and treaties. It requires the fierce protection of the human experience. The evolution of these documentary formats, from 1960s television interviews to real-time YouTube broadcasts, represents an active struggle against the erasure of time. As the chronological distance from the trenches grows, every generation is forced to invent a new language to translate that trauma for a modern audience. In 1914, Lawrence Binyon wrote a poem promising that the fallen would not grow old as we that are left grow old. By constantly reinventing how we bridge the empathy gap, we keep that promise. We ensure that in our collective memory, they never do.